What's going on, people? Welcome back to Curtis Shaw TV, back with another transfer special video. And it's only right we're bringing back on again Ben Jacobs, friend of the channel. How are you, mate?
Good to be back. Just a few days to go, and then finally I can get some sleep.
And you can rest. All the carnage finishes, and we're back to normal. But listen, pleasure to get you on. I appreciate you giving up your time for the second time in a week or so. And a lot has changed in the last week for Arsenal. We finally got a story to really discuss, and we'll start with it. We'll get straight into it. Ollie Watkins' story broke yesterday. Started off as interest, and then it came out that we'd had an offer rejected, £60 million, and that Arsenal maybe will go back in with another offer, but Aston Villa were unhappy with the timing with the Champions League. We then hear a little bit later on that evening through yourself and some other journalists online that John Duran fee has been accepted and that he's set to have his medical to go to Al Nassr. So it was greeted with a little bit of joy and a little bit of sort of, anger from Arsenal fans. Is it just a PR offer to appease the fans? Is there any chance of getting him? What's the latest on the offer for you? And do you think with Duran going to Al Nassr, Arsenal have any chance of getting Ollie Watkins, or is it very difficult to get that deal done now?
No chance. That's my understanding. And I don't think they had a chance regardless of the Durant situation either. So that's not the most positive way to start. I know.
Cheers,
what I can say is that Watkins would be keen on the move, but he's not exactly a player to agitate and force his way out of a football club. So if we kind of take it back a little bit, first of all, it should be pointed out that sources at both clubs refer to it as an approach. I know the 60 million number has kind of been touted, but it's not necessarily stood up at that exact valuation, to my understanding. Although you could make an argument that Arsenal have shown their hand. They are prepared to pay a significant amount of money for a player like Watkins, because he's obviously not going to come significantly cheaper than that number that's been suggested. So now are they going to go and spend that ballpark valuation in the final hours of the window? Because it answers one question: have Arsenal under PSR got the ability to make an outright purchase, let's just call it, in excess of 50 million? And I think the answer is yes. But if we just look at the backstory, I think Arsenal have been unfairly misrepresented here, because it's true that Aston Villa were disappointed by the timing of the approach because they had a big Champions League game against Celtic, but Arsenal had no choice. That is the reality. And the reason for that is because the Saudi Pro League window does not close on February the 3rd. It shuts on Friday. And Arsenal got wind of the fact that the John Duran deal to Al Nassr, he's doing a medical at the time of recording, was going to be agreed. So if they wanted to influence the situation, knowing that Villa are not going to sanction Duran and Watkins in the same window, they had to move when they did. Had they waited until after the Champions League game, it would have been too late. And you may note in my reporting and others, we broke the Duran agreement around about half an hour in to the Villa Celtic game. So if Arsenal said, okay, we'll be respectful to Villa, we'll call you on Thursday morning, the opportunity would have been completely missed. But in speaking to Villa, two things were relayed. One, the answer is no to your approach. And two, the answer is no, even if John Duran goes to Al Nassr. So even in a scenario, to my understanding, where Duran stayed and Watkins was a player that Arsenal wanted, it still would have been a no in this window anyway from Aston Villa. So Arsenal were ambitious in trying. And I know we hear some talks of it might advance, something could still happen, they might place a second bid, but I'm still told that Villa's position is crystal clear. They do not want to sell Ollie Watkins in January.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty. I would have liked you to have said something else, but the honesty is appreciated. Just quickly, from an Arsenal point of view, then, do you think they were trying to maybe put Villa in a situation where they thought, well, there's money on the table for Watkins, do we sell him and keep Duran because he's a little bit younger? I'm trying to sort of get the viewpoint on what Arsenal were thinking could happen.
Yeah, I think there's a feeling that Villa actually need to sell an asset, whether that's PSR or just because they're going to bid for Mathys Tel or João Felix. And Duran was always more likely because he'd said he wanted the Saudi move. The money is astronomical. It's a 90 million euros package or in that ballpark. Same number, by the way, that saw Neymar move from PSG to Al Hilal. And 77 million of that on preferable payment terms is the fixed fee. So brilliant bit of business for Villa. And even though Duran started the season brilliantly, if you go back to the summer, Unai Emery was prepared to let him go because this has been a player agitating to play every single week. He thinks that he's ready to be the main man, a regular starter. And it would be interesting, of course, at Al Nassr to see where he fits in. And I think why they've picked him is they feel like they can play Ronaldo and John Duran, whereas for Villa, it's always been a case in Unai Emery's system of Ollie Watkins or Duran, predominantly anyway. I think there's been a game or two where they have found a way to play them together. So Villa were always inclined at the right valuation to sell Duran. And in terms of Arsenal's thinking, I don't think it's necessarily about, is Duran younger with a higher ceiling? Could Villa change their mind and get rid of Ollie Watkins? To me, it's more just there's a market opportunity there if you feel that Villa have to sell somebody. And then the Duran situation at the time they made their inquiry, and I think this is telling and again quite underreported, the Nassr delegation were simultaneously negotiating with Victor Boniface, and they had an agreement in principle there. And the player did a medical. Now, that medical didn't come after the agreement. It came before. And it was basically Nassr and the central deal makers saying, if we're going to invest 60 million in Victor Boniface, we want to know he's completely fit. There's no sort of physical skeletons in the closet. So atypically, they did the medical. Then they agreed the deal. Then they didn't sign the paperwork. Then they went back to the number one choice, John Duran, to see if they could get that over the line. So if you're Arsenal, you're thinking, wait a minute, Villa need to sell. Duran is not definite at that point. We're hearing that they've agreed a deal with Leverkusen for Victor Boniface. They can only sign Duran or Boniface. It's not yet done with Villa. It is verbally done with Leverkusen. So you swoop in opportunistically as if to say to Villa, this might fall through. They might sign Boniface. You may need money. We don't want Duran. We do want Watkins. Money's on the table. We can do the deal straight away. If that allows you to move in the market and bring in whoever you feel is necessary or balance your books heading into this financial year, then all parties are satisfied. And I think that was the motivation behind the approach.
Yeah, it does make sense. Even though, there is an element of frustration still, but I get the angle and I appreciate your insight. One thing that you mentioned, and I think what Arsenal fans are now clinging to with a few days left of the window is, like you said, they have shown their hand. They have made an offer, whether it be 50, 60 million pounds, we're all of a sudden going, oh, there is money in the pot. This Mathys Tel link, I mean, people saying that up to 7 clubs have approached Bayern Munich to get him, whether it be potentially a loan with obligation or option or a permanent transfer. I've seen Arsenal's name thrown in the mix a little bit, although they seem to be sort of leaning towards other clubs. I'm seeing Tottenham, Manchester United, and a few others. To your knowledge, are Arsenal interested in Tel? Is he somebody that they might be looking at?
Tel is on the radar for sure. And like I said before, if you have put down a significant amount of money, at least in theory, even if there was a low likelihood that it would ever be accepted for Ollie Watkins, then Tel on the market is going to be somewhere in that ballpark for a permanent sale, probably a bit cheaper than the 60 million pounds. I think 60 million euros might do it. And therefore, if Arsenal have urgency and need, you wonder why they won't turn their attention to a player like that, because you don't have the same stumbling block. Bayern are now willing to sanction a permanent sale. At this stage, I think we can say that Arsenal are interested, but it's not as advanced as other clubs. You've got Manchester United who want a straight loan. You've got Tottenham who are going to be very ambitious and try and buy the player with some kind of permanence, loan with obligation or just a straight sale. You've got Chelsea who have got a long-standing interest. They've got a bit of leverage because Bayern might be persuaded to take Christopher Nkunku. They definitely want the player. It's just Chelsea's asking price is in excess of £60 million. But of course, there's always a bit more flexibility when two separate deals get done, because both clubs benefit. But I think the challenge Chelsea have got is convincing the player he's going to get regular game time. And from Arsenal's point of view, it's probably the same as well, that if they proceed, firstly, they would likely want permanence. I don't think you want to sort of dabble in a top talent like Tel, who's versatile, okay, covers a stopgap between now and the end of the season. But then if he goes back to Bayern, you're feeling quite disappointed with that. So my gut feeling is that if Arsenal were to progress, they would want minimum an option to give themselves the ability to turn that move permanent. And Tel is open to the Premier League, by the way, but Arsenal yet, compared to other suitors, not as advanced. We'll have to see whether that changes in the final few days of the window. Not impossible, but there's definitely other Premier League clubs pushing a little bit harder. And I think the reason for that is probably down to the fact that Tel's primary position is left winger. So yes, he can play centrally and move over to the right-hand side. But the reality is that you've got Raheem Sterling on loan as kind of backup. There's Trossard and Martinelli. And in addition to that, you have each of those players that offer you the same versatility. Not all of them, of course, can go and play centrally as a number 9, but many of them can move behind the striker in an 8, advanced 8, number 10, false 9, and some of them can move to the right-hand side. Tel's first position is left winger, and really Arsenal are going to be looking at Cunha or Nico Williams in the summer, in likelihood, maybe even Jamie Gittins as well. And on the right-hand side, they have urgency to find ultimately cover at the moment for the injured Saka. But even when he's fit, you still need some more firepower on that right-hand side, regardless of when Airy, and also the fact that Gabby Jesus, when fit, can go over that right-hand side. There's been a long-term plan to find right-sided cover as well, because Saka, when fit, plays a lot of minutes. So I get the impression that Tel is the right kind of profile and age for Arsenal, but to drop 50, 60 million on a left winger when you need a number 9, even if the guy you're signing can also play in that position, he's not a specialist there. And I think the last thing Arsenal would want is to kind of spend that money, have somebody that can play in that position, put him in that position, and then immediately everybody go, but he's not really the number 9 that we're looking for. So there will be some reservations, in my opinion, but it's not impossible.
I mean, the last time he was on the show, I think the beginning of last week, I think we spent more than half the show talking about Sesko and Mathys Cunha. I mean, Leipzig seem very adamant they're not selling him in this window. The Cunha situation seems to have gone a little bit quiet. Is there any potential for revisiting those two deals, or do you think they now will be pushed to any deal would potentially be in the summer for Sesko or Cunha?
Yeah, Sesko seems off for January, although as I reported, and I think it's now widely shared, the approach was made to Leipzig to understand, are you or aren't you prepared to sanction an exit? And you never know, because if you're looking to be very ambitious on Watkins, then why not just put down 60, 70 million for Sesko now and see if Leipzig change their mind? But I get the impression that that's been done discreetly, and now it's downplayed by sources. So there's no denying that Arsenal went to Leipzig, asked the question, tried to understand whether there was a particular fee that might warrant a sale. But the other challenge is that you got a player that's saying, I committed to a year here because I thought that was best for my development. And Sesko is going to have exactly the same options in the summer. So the player can wait. He's not missing an opportunity now that isn't going to be apparent in the summer. So I think that Sesko is Arsenal's preference, because financially Alexander Isak, who's kind of the dream target, is not looking as likely on the terms that Arsenal would wish to proceed with. Maybe it changes if Newcastle don't get Champions League or European football, but in a scenario where Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, I think it's bad news for Arsenal on the Isak front. But as I've said many times, Sesko kind of picked Arsenal over Chelsea and Manchester United, and then had a secondary decision to make, which was, do I go now or do I stay at Leipzig? And he chose for his development, unfortunately, from Arsenal's perspective, the latter. So Sesko for the summer rather than now. Cunha's still interesting because Wolves' position is crystal clear. They don't want to sell, but somebody could try their luck. And at that point, both player and club would have a big decision to make. So I wouldn't rule out just a little bit of Sesko drama. However, what I would say, I wouldn't rule out, a little bit of Cunha drama, but what I would say is that Wolves' valuation for January is in excess of £80 million. So if anyone, including Arsenal, wants Cunha now, then they're going to have to pay significantly above the odds.
Yeah, it makes sense. Just a final couple of players, because obviously a lot of Arsenal fans are saying, okay, if no Watkins, where do they go now? One player that completely baffles me why nobody has gone for him, especially when you look at the striker market, particularly in the Premier League, is Victor Gyokeres. I mean, this guy's numbers are pretty much above anybody. And he spoke about his disappointment that, nobody sort of came in for him in the summer. And they say he has this maybe release clause of around 80 million. I know it's a lot of money, but is there any possibility of anybody going for him? Have Arsenal ever been linked with him? Or again, is that something you see as a summer possibility?
Yeah, I think the position is very clear. It's 100 million euros now, which is equivalent to the release clause. But in the summer, there's an agreement that he can be sold for 70 million euros. So suitors are not going to overpay now. And there's going to be a much harder negotiation in the winter compared to in the summer, whereas the feeling is that all parties will be more amicable in sanctioning a move and a much lower amount than last summer. So the sporting position was it's release clause or nothing over the summer, and they're holding suitors to the same number now. But there's so much change at Sporting. Ruben Amorim has left, and there's no guarantee, by the way, that Manchester United enter that race. You got Man City, who have got Hugo Viana coming in at the end of the season as sporting director. And again, people will naturally make a link, but Omar Marmoush has just come in and Erling Haaland is the main man there. So Victor Gyokeres is not going to move unless he's given regular starting football as the number one. And right now, I think we can't discount Arsenal from that race either, because they've certainly looked at him. And some of the rivals being linked will not necessarily have the funds in Manchester United's case or the squad space to give the player the demands in Manchester City's. Chelsea made an inquiry 2 windows ago and chose not to proceed. It's not true to my knowledge they ever made an 80 million euros bid, contrary to some reports. So if Gyokeres moves to the Premier League, Arsenal will feel there's a deal there to be had. It's just that I sense at the moment that a lot of teams have kind of nailed their colours to a number 1, number 2 target, because you've got to pre-plan for the summer and almost pre-agree. I'm not saying you go out there and actually get the deal done now, but you're definitely lining up for these big names because you know that there's a scramble. And right now, I think the most viable and top choice for Arsenal, as I've said many, many times, remains Benjamin Sesko. And then if they can bring in another now, it will be 2 strikers. I think the number 2 in terms of feasibility is Alexander Isak, but he's the number 1 in terms of the absolute dream, even above Sesko. So those 2 are above Gyokeres at the moment. And ultimately, with Victor Gyokeres being more expensive than Benjamin Sesko in terms of fee and in terms of wage, why wouldn't you just proceed with Benjamin Sesko in the belief that Arsenal is his number 1 choice when he leaves Leipzig? And this is why I think Arsenal are being quite cautious in January, because they know that. And they want to ensure that they save that budget and they don't basically bring in another Sesko type player right now that makes Sesko think, actually, your project's a little bit different. So I've changed my mind. And it's not just Arsenal. I think they've got Sesko and Isak as 1 and 2 in whatever order you call it. Idealistically, Isak then Sesko. Practically and financially, Sesko then Isak. You've got Chelsea, who like Sesko, but probably Liam Delap is higher on the pecking order. And they're very confident that if they choose to proceed there, they can get the player as well. And then obviously there's other names we haven't touched upon, like Victor Osimhen, who's still going to be very expensive. Several Premier League clubs have looked at him. But again, I don't think it's a real conversational narrative for Arsenal at this point. So it's frustrating for the fan base, I know, because they kind of hear what if, and they hear it's for the summer, and they hear not feasible. And then the window shuts and you're like, we're chasing after midfielders. We have Zubimendi for the summer. We've got Naipan in a big race against City Football Group for Girona, by the way, not for Manchester City. But where is this number 9? And my gut feeling is just that they're not going to panic buy. So if the right number 9 is not available, they won't force it and commit budget. And instead, as demoralizing as it may be for the fan base, they'll wait until the summer and then a big window will follow.
Yeah, I mean, as Arsenal fans, we're used to it, Ben. I think the frustration is because January can sometimes be quite quiet. And in terms of players, there hasn't been loads. But you look at Kvaratskhelia, who went to PSG. You look at Mamouche to Man City, Duran to Saudi. You know, release clauses out there as well. It kind of felt like a market. They could have got somebody of high quality. But just as we begin to round up, because I know you're very busy and I'm keen to let you go, so you're not in a rush. We spoke last time. You mentioned a couple of other players like Igor Jesus or anything. Do you see Arsenal maybe getting a loan player in before the window closes, or do you think they may just be patient and let it pass?
Yeah, if the right opportunity comes, I think a loan is possible. They can't do a Premier League loan, which somewhat rules out Evan Ferguson, although my understanding is the secret or anonymous Premier League club that did actually make an approach to Brighton was Arsenal, and they were told very clearly that Brighton don't want to sell. They want a loan. So Evan Ferguson's quite interesting because, as I revealed a few weeks ago, Neto and Raheem Sterling can't be recalled. Arsenal can't do a loan. They have to buy. So you call up Brighton and you say, will you sell? And they don't want permanence as it stands anyway. And that would put off, I think, Arsenal, because Evan Ferguson, even though 18 months ago he was an £80 million player, he's been injured. He's lost his goal scoring touch to an extent, but he's still looking at £45 million, I would have thought, if Brighton are to sanction an exit. And it's just not something that is in the interest of Arsenal to take big outlay and risk on that kind of player. It's different with Watkins because were they to have succeeded, you're getting a fit, proven goal scorer. But to just outright buy Evan Ferguson with no try before you buy, with no option, with no loan because of the circumstances in which their Premier League loans are full, you might get a scenario where you bring him in, everyone goes, okay, fine, and now we'll wait for the striker in the summer, and then Evan Ferguson might not be fit, or he may not add that much, and you're suddenly in a situation where you've dropped a whole lot of money and got very limited returns. So I can understand why they've walked away, as it stands anyway, from making a permanent offer for Evan Ferguson. But it's also down to Brighton and them having a high valuation and not really wanting to let the player go. So now Victor Boniface is staying, by the looks of things anyway, at Leverkusen because John Duran has passed his medical to go and move to Al Nassr. I think the Evan Ferguson loan to Leverkusen won't happen, and West Ham United might be able to get that done. And it depends with them as well, whether they're saying, because Nicholas Füllkrug is injured and due to the unfortunate Mikel Antonio accident that's going to keep him out, we don't know even when he'll return, but at least it's great to see him out of hospital. They may say, let's just do a temporary loan. It's fine for us between now and the end of the season, and then we'll reassess in the market. That isn't something Arsenal could do. If they had a loan spot, it might be a different story. In terms of international loans, they'll be opportunistic on the market. So I still think we haven't seen the last of Arsenal in this window. The hand was shown, like I said before, with the ballpark at least, even if it's not entirely acknowledged by both clubs, that they have and are prepared to drop now. And that money for me is not just going to be taken off the table and then put towards the summer. I think if that ballpark is at least broadly accurate, they will use some of that on an attack-minded player if they possibly can between now and the end of the window.
My last question, because I know you've got to go. You said there Arsenal were the club that approached Brighton for Evan Ferguson. Could Arsenal not get around that by maybe making Neto a permanent, although he didn't play great last night, so whether they would want to. But could they not sign Neto on a permanent and then get Ferguson on loan, or is that not doable?
There could be solutions, I suppose, but I'm just not aware that that's Arsenal's intent in the final few days of the window. And again, I'm not so sure that Arsenal would want Evan Ferguson on just a straight loan due to the fact it's unclear how fit and match sharp he's going to be down the stretch. And the last thing you want to do, because straight loan is basically like paying rent compared to buying a house, it would be a hefty loan fee. You'd cover the wages. If he can't add value to the squad because in the imminent short term, he's not fully fit, then you're kind of throwing a little bit of money down the drain. So I think Arsenal's perspective is that if they move for Egan Ferguson, and a lot could change, I suppose, in the final mad few days of the window where clubs have one position and then they sort of go, okay, we got to do something and this is our only option. But my feeling with Evan Ferguson and Arsenal is that if they were to proceed, they would want Brighton to cede on allowing an option. And at the moment, it seems like the Brighton perspective is it's a loan and then they want him back at the football club. And that, coupled with changing Brighton's mind with an excessive bid and a risky one as well, given the player's fitness at the moment, it is not really something that the club are looking to do.
Listen, Ben, I appreciate you coming on as always, dropping an exclusive as well, so we know that we approached Evan Ferguson. And the Ollie Watkins deal doesn't look very realistic, but at least we've got something to talk about. Appreciate you coming on and giving up your time, and I hope the window ends smoothly for you. I'm sure you'll be very busy over the next few days.
Cheers, Curtis. Keep up the good work. We'll speak soon.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone. Bless.